Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today. We know this is a busy holiday season and we have lots of demands on our times, but we are honored to have such an extraordinary group of people joining us and so many of you out in the audience. Thank you all for taking the time. This is going to be an extraordinary conversation. We are in a moment of democratic challenge around the country. And today we have two of the leading experts who have implemented citizen assemblies, a novel form of democratic innovation, and we are having them literally join us from across the globe. And so this is a really rare opportunity to hear from people who are on the ground implementing this extraordinary innovation. We have Anouch, the deputy mayor of Paris. She was elected as the deputy mayor of Paris in 2020 after being elected as a councillor on June 28 in the second round of Parisian municipal elections. She is one of the youngest 37 deputy mayors and is responsible for community life, the participation of citizens, and public debate. And in 2021, she developed the permanent Paris Citizen Assembly. We are also joined by Peggy Flynn, the city manager of Petaluma, California. She was named the city manager in 2019, bringing more than 25 years of public sector experience, having served in communication and leadership positions. And she implemented a citizen assembly in Petaluma to determine the use of her city's fairground properties. Is one of the first implementations of a citizen assembly in the United States. We'll share more on that after, but it is truly an extraordinary opportunity to hear directly from people who are in place doing this. We see enormous demands put on government officials and elected officials in places to reimagine and redefine the relationship between citizens and the state. It is a very unique opportunity to be able to hear directly from them. We are able to do this because of an extraordinary partnership that we have with FIDE North America. Big thank you to Marjan Assasi and to Columbia World Projects. Big thank you to Tom Asher and Anna Marchese. And I want to thank the New America events team, including Sarah Jacob and Mark Schmidt. We are extraordinarily fortunate to be part of this partnership. We are doing a series to understand what are the innovations that are occurring on the ground with citizen assemblies. How do we understand them in practice? What are the opportunities and challenges of this form of participation? And there are no better people to hear from than both of you. So thank you all for joining, and I'm going to turn it over to Tom Asher.
Hi all, I'm Tom Asher from Columbia University, Columbia World Projects. I am so pleased to be in conversation with you both. So a warm welcome on a day of immense uncertainty about the future of our democratic institutions. I think that's certainly the case in France, and I suspect we'll at least touch on that at moments. I suspect this conversation also will provide a tonic for some of the anxiety we feel about our respective democracies, showing us what's possible beyond what we routinely encounter. Our methods of participating in democracy, I think it's safe to say, have seemed stale to many. I'm not alone in sensing this or talking about this. We are invited to vote for candidates every election cycle who constitute seemingly increasingly ineffective and unstable governments, but our pathways for meaningful input and deliberation and contribution are quite limited. You both, however, introduced real innovations that change the horizons for what it means to participate in democracy at the level of the city. I'm excited to think with you about these practices that you identified as solutions for what ails us, how they came to be institutionalized and adopted by city government, and hope we can get pretty granular about that process, and what you've learned in the process of implementation and what you might do differently if there's a next time. But that's getting ahead of the stories that we'll unpack with you. So let's start this conversation at an earlier moment, before you had launched these grand experiments in democracy. Starting with Deputy Mayor Anouch Toranian, can you remind us of the social and political environment across France and within Paris in 2018? What were you seeing and what were you responding to?
Yeah, first of all, I'm very happy and excited to be with you today. It's a real honor to be able to speak about the Citizen Assembly of Paris, which is, as you said, a huge innovation for Paris, of course, but also for France. Just to give you a bit of the feedback of the creation of the genesis of this Citizen Assembly. So as you know, we had the Yellow Vest movement in France. At that time, the French government launched the Great National Debate in 2019. And in Paris, we wanted to go beyond this governmental initiative by implementing an ambitious process, which we called at that time the Consensus Conference of Paris. So over 3 months, this process included 74 public meetings, 12 hours of open dialogue at the Paris City Hall. We had also a traveling participation caravan. We had also collection points set up in local town halls. We have district town halls in Paris, 17 of them. And we had during that time of this consensus conference more than 9,000 contribution that we gathered from Parisians, which was a quite impressive demonstration of significant support and enthusiasm from citizens about this citizen participation. And we organized this citizen conference, and we wanted to translate this democratic aspiration into concrete action. So we asked them how to strengthen the citizen participation in Paris, and this resulted by a deliberation, what we call a deliberation, which is a kind of the Parisian law, which we adopted in June 2019. So I was not elected at that time. And they introduced 5 key measures, which led to major advancements, but also into this Citizen Assembly of Paris. The idea was to empower Parisians in order to act and make decisions, including the creation of the Citizen Assembly. So we had several demands from the Parisians. And then I was elected in 2020, and then we had to design this assembly and to make it as innovative as we could at that time. But we had the strong feeling that we were kind of translating the democratic aspiration of the Parisians.
Thank you so much. And so this was a responsive measure to immediate demands made by the Gilets jaunes, the Yellow Vest movement. Peggy, I'm going to bring you in 1 minute, but Anouch, I want to stay with the question and we'll come back to the mechanisms that you put in place, but I want to stay with this the broader anxieties about democracy and economic inequalities that the youth were responding to at that moment. What were you seeing on the ground in terms of a democracy deficit? What were the voting patterns starting to look like? What was polarization already starting to be a problem? My sense is it was, but would love to hear more from you about those kind of, whether that was part of the larger ecosystem in which you were operating.
Yeah, so as you know, in France, we have a big problem, which is abstentionism. It's not very easy to say it in English, but people don't go to vote. And this is a major problem. And this also led to a kind of, defiance towards the political institution and political elected officials. So we had to strengthen and to rebuild trust. And the Gilets jaunes, Yellow Vest movement was kind of one of the demonstration of this lack of trust between the citizens and the political representation as a National Assembly, but also local political elected officials. So yeah, the idea was to find a way to strengthen the Parisian democracy, because at all levels we had some levels and we had some some power to do things, and this was one of the things we could do. And the previous mandate was also marked by the creation of the participatory budget in Paris. So globally, the environment, the democratic environment, is not very good in France, and we had yesterday another demonstration of that defiance. I don't know how to say that in English, but the lack of trust between citizens and political elected officials. So yeah, we are trying to build new initiatives, to innovate, and to find ways for Parisians to be more more active and to have more power to act for the city.
Yep, perfect. And we'll come back to those innovations, including, let's think about how participatory budgeting relates to some of citizen assemblies, for example. But let me bring Peggy in, who's been very patient. Peggy, what were the conditions like on the ground when you were starting to think through how to renew sort of democratic engagement in Petaluma? There presumably weren't weekly protests that you were responding to, although maybe I'm wrong.
No, but a lot of apathy. And, Anouch, I have to give you just major props, just because, not even being elected and already, coming up with some really amazing innovative tools to engage your community, because what we see, Tom, and we see this across the United States, but definitely in local government, is we are on the ground, and yet because we don't make government accessible, because the most privileged can come to a council meeting and spend the evening at the council meeting, or you only have special interests. You know, we just a lot of, maybe we have a very engaged community in Petaluma, but a lot of apathy from the standpoint of, you know, we had to do a lot of work. When I joined the city, we're a very old city in California, one of the 10 oldest cities in California. We were facing bankruptcy, which was kind of crazy because we were a very affluent community, and we hadn't really, and we had 2 failed sales tax attempts, and it wasn't because the community didn't support us, it was our infighting among our electeds. So when I got hired, we passed the largest sales tax measure in Sonoma County during the pandemic, but I told the council, you have to work together, and we have to be transparent, and we have to go out. And we built a fiscal and organizational sustainability plan with the community. So we started already this re-engagement of a very supportive community, because who wants their city to fail? And the next big thing that was facing us was a many decades long, over 50 years, lease with the state district, 4th District Agricultural Association for over 55 acres in the center of our city. And we have a very real split in our city. We have east and west. And so this is the center of our city. I call it One Petaluma, and it had been leased out to the state for $1 a year for 50 years to run a 4-day fair. And then they could do whatever they wanted for the rest of the year, which did not include allowing our community to be on the property. This topic had never been spoken about in a public forum, only in closed session. So there was a ton of urban legends about this property. And that was the second gauntlet that was thrown down when I started back in 2019. So knowing that this was going to be a very controversial topic and I would have special interests come to the table, really wanted to hear from our community and really want to hear from the people that never engage, because we're not that big of a city. We're 60,000 residents.
So there's a lot to unpack there. So part of what you're proposing, no, it's great. And part of what you're saying is that we have some measures that allow citizens to engage government. And I guess there are a few things to say. They're often very thin. You know, you can come to a public meeting and express your discontent, but that's very different from often having a constructive policy dialogue, right?
Informed participation, right? I mean, that in my 30 years of being in public sector, that's always been a dream, to have informed participation, because how do you do that? If you have a charrette, somebody may learn for an hour about something, or they're just coming in because their minds are made up about what they believe. But to get 90 hours, which we did out of our panel, of informed participation, and that we didn't run the panel, was priceless, invaluable.
And there's an equity consideration that you were putting it forward, which is that it brings voices into the process that typically don't participate. You said all this. I'm just trying to sort of hold on a few really important points here.
Oversampling for K-12 demographics, paying, at $20 an hour, paying for childcare, elder care technology, making it, and it was during the pandemic, making it accessible. I think it just transformed, also built a lot of trust, because it demystified government, and we weren't running the process. The city wasn't running the process. We were just one stakeholder. So it was, like I said, invaluable.
Yeah, phenomenal. One of the things that we often hear is a kind of, maybe this is more true of an earlier moment than this moment, thanks to efforts like yours, but that citizens are often chastised for being passive rather than putting themselves forward. But increasingly, we're seeing efforts by localities like yours, by cities, by municipalities, in order to actually create spaces that invite people in, that are intentionally bridging across social divisions, but also really equipping people with voice and some authority in making decisions about their their own futures. And in some ways, it's a supply side. This is the political scientist Ari Hahn has called this a supply side solution that is starting to emerge from government, and that we need more and more of this. So what you're both doing is just exemplary, and I think that's part of why we wanted to have this conversation. Maybe, Anouch, we could come back to, you started to mention participatory budgeting in addition to citizens assemblies. Can you talk about the repertoire of practices that you started to explore with, your very different, presumably, financial position in the city of Paris versus a bankrupt Petaluma?
Yeah. Obviously. So as you know, we have a strong tradition at Paris in terms of participatory initiative. It all began in 2019 when the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, came back from Brazil and imported the participatory budget philosophy. So now we are celebrating the 10th anniversary of the participatory budget in Paris. But it's not only 10 years of the participatory budget, it's 10 years of active and ambitious politic in order to strengthen the participatory democracy in Paris. So we had, of course, the participatory budget, which is now, I think, the biggest participatory budget in the world, with the over nearly 800 million euros invested through this participatory budget. And the idea with the second mandate, so this was during the first mandate, we also created a lot of bodies, such as the Council of the Youth of Paris, the Council of the European of Paris, the Council of the Future Generation of Paris. We also created, but this was mandatory by the law, we created some council, district council. So in our neighborhood of Paris, we have a council, but we don't have the ability to manage them and to say what they should be and what they should do. So this is a competence of the district themselves. But we also wanted, during the second mandate, the mayor of Paris said this second mandate will be the mandate of how we can put more vegetalize the city. I don't know how to say that in English, but to make a greener city. But this also will be the mandate of the democracy in Paris. So the idea was to take the philosophy of the participatory budget. You have an idea, you can vote for this idea, and then the city of Paris is financing the idea. We wanted that 25% of our investment budget would be decided by Parisians themselves. So we had to create the ways to target this goal. The Citizen Assembly was part of this philosophy, but we also created some democratic tools, such as a tool called Embellish Your Neighborhood. So we take each year one neighborhood in each district of Paris, and we have, based on the analysis made by engineers and people from the city of Paris, citizens can say, oh, I want a bike lane here, or I want more trees on this street, or this kind of things, where they can bring ideas, and then the city of Paris is doing the implementing the ideas in the neighborhood. So we created the Citizen Assembly of Paris. We also created another body called the Council of the Parisian Association, because I have this, this double delegation, citizen participation, but also associative life, which are kind of the two feet on which the city of Paris is, working. We have the citizen, but we also have a really strong associative life in Paris, more than 70,000 of association. So we created also this body in order for the association to be able to impact our municipal action. And then we wanted to create the big moments of dialogue with Parisians. So we created the Parisian Dialogues, which is kind of innovation, because it's a way on dematerialized tool when you can put ideas, and this permits us to extract some areas of consensus and areas of dissensus, and to be able to see what is gathering the Parisian and what is dividing the Parisian. So based on the first question we asked to the Parisian, and the first question was how how to live better in Paris. We had some point of dissensus, and the mayor of Paris decided to put one of these dissensus into a citizen votation. So we created also the citizen votation, kind of based on what is done in Switzerland. And we had 2 Parisian dialogues and 2 citizen votation in Paris, which allows us and allow the Parisian to have a direct impact on the municipal action, and so on. We are trying to create also, in each of the transformation of the city. For example, when you want to transform a place or an urban neighborhood, we are doing some consultation, public meetings, and people can be more active in this kind of meeting and gatherings. But we also wanted to create some hubs, of course, numeric hubs when they can participate and they can act. We also created the community of the Parisian volunteers in order for them to be more empowered and to be able to engage in their city. But we also created some physical places, such as the Climate Academy, but also the Solidarity Fabric, not fabric, but manufactory. It's kind of Fabrique de la Solidarité. I don't know how to say that in English. And we recently created the Concord Theater in Paris, which is a place which mixes culture, art, and democracy subjects. So this is a place when people can gather, can debate, can also be trained. And this is also a place when democracy can live. And we are thinking of creating a house of engagement in Paris in order to give them the tools to be more engaged.
I suspect anyone who's involved with managing cities who just heard that range of activities that you've put into place is both awed and probably green with envy that you were able to do this and that you had the vision to do this. I mean, it's remarkable, and to stack these opportunities in this way, and it sounds like to make them mutually reinforcing. I'm wondering, I'd love both of you to reflect on what you think citizen assemblies can do that's distinct from all the other tools that you've just identified.
Well, I think it's the missing piece of our pie, right? It didn't preclude all of our, Anouch just talked about a lot of robust engagement, and on a much smaller scale, we do the same. We are known for doing some very, robust engagement, but it's been that missing piece of pie and for informed participation of bringing our residents into government to be able to demystify and feel like, remove those barriers of participation. Because Tom, as you mentioned earlier, yes, we hear chastising of our citizens for not being participating in government, but that's our own fault, right? I do blame government because I know how much we do during the day, and oftentimes what is deemed the easiest is, well, we're just going to get this done, and we know we're going to upset some folks, but we need to get the thing done. And that just ends up coming back at us because we don't get the support we need when we need it. And that was, exemplified when we had the 2 failed sales tax attempts, and going out and engaging the community and making them feel like their voice is being heard, and doing more. This is just such not part of the traditional fabric of government. And so, having this informed participation, now I have people that want to have leadership roles in our government, and I want that next generation to come and be a city manager, be a mayor, be a council member, and want to be part of city decision-making, local decision-making.
Yeah, that's great. So informed decision-making is part of what's distinctive about citizen assemblies versus many of the other kinds of participatory
That's definitely
processes.
one. That's definitely one.
Yep. And then there's a kind of co-production of policy options, or what my colleague Holly calls co-governance.
Yes. Yes.
Anouch, anything to add to that? Oh.
Yeah, I think that what was the plus-value of the citizen assembly was the fact that we tried to take the deliberative shift in Paris. And what is the pre-value again of this citizen assembly is they really have the ability and the power to write the Parisian law. And this is a real innovation in France, and we are really proud of that. This was not the case of the first cohort of the Citizen Assembly because they only put vows to the Council of Paris, but during the second cohort and the second edition of this Citizen Assembly, they really had the power to vote a citizen law in Paris, which was kind of huge for us. And I hope this will be inspiring the other cities in France. But yeah, the fact is that, with the participatory budget, we gave them the key of the budget. Then with the tool of embellish your neighborhood, we gave them the key of, the hammer to build their city. And then we gave them the pen to write the Parisian law. So this is increasing in their ability to first be trained, to learn about how a city is functioning with it, which is not really quite easy to understand to everyone, even for me sometimes. But the fact is that it's a real empowering tool. And this is a real impacting tool. And this was all the spirit and the philosophy and the goal we had when we were designing the Citizen Assembly with your colleagues from the FIDE, which was how can we have not only just another body and say, we created the Citizen Assembly and that's it. We wanted to be innovating, we wanted to be impactful, and we also wanted to be sure that all the work of the Citizen Assembly and of the citizens were not just another report, on the shelves, but really something impactful, and for them to have the right to follow up what they did, and to have this follow-up right, droit de suite, as we call it in French, but to be able to say, okay, we voted this Parisian law, we voted these Parisian vows, but now what has been done by the city, and we want clear evaluation of what has been done based on our work. So I think, we were trying to be as impactful as we can.
I love those images of the pen and the hammer, and there was a third one I missed. Do you remember what you said? It was quite eloquent.
Sorry?
You
the pen
use
at
three,
the end,
the pen, the
right?
hammer, but these are these are metaphors that showcase the key power of government in building and drafting laws and passing them. And what you're really doing then is sharing power with citizens in a way that's, radical, but it seems like it's making government more effective in the process and ensuring that government delivers to the needs that the communities themselves have expressed, which is remarkable. There are lots of pieces I want to pick up on here, but maybe I feel like I'm letting a lot of things drop. So let me pull back for a minute. Peggy, you mentioned that you were working on land, the Citizens Assembly was addressing land use questions. Anouch, you mentioned several topics that they were addressing. Maybe it's worth having a conversation about how the topics themselves were selected. Peggy, do you want to start with this?
Well, for us, it was timing, because the lease was expiring at the end of 2023. And that's, like I said, it had been 50 years, and actually a total of 80 years that the property hadn't been, that the city hadn't managed. So it was nearing the end, and there was just an expectation that we were just going to continue. But you could feel that this topic had never been spoken about publicly. So this had to be, of all the things, and now I'm so excited because now I want to use Assemblies for our charter amendments and all the things. I'm so excited just learn about this tool, but this was a necessity. This was, when I heard about it, it just within 5 minutes, I said, this is the missing piece. This is the thing that's going to not only bring deep awareness, but I knew that it would also bring our community more united. And when we actually adopted the guidelines and accepted the proposals from the Assembly, when Council adopted that, instead of having World War III at our council meeting, there was hardly anybody in the chambers, which is very unusual for her. We go very late on our council meetings and we are always packed to the gills. And we hardly had anybody because I think everybody went, oh, good. Our community spoke, the city is doing what we're asking them to do, and it was pretty brilliant. And I was so, it was a proud moment, a seminal moment for our city. So, and like I said, it's 55 acres of land that, had we not passed that 1 cent sales tax, we would have had to sell that property. I mean, that was the other thing. It was a mandate. It was like, okay, we just passed this 1 cent sales tax. Now we have the ability to take this property and make it work for our community. And that's what we've been doing. So it's been, I think it's transformed our city.
Makes sense. And government has so many liabilities and very few assets that are productive. So land is invaluable in those moments, or extraordinarily valuable, maybe is the other way to put it. Anouch, what about you? What about the city of Paris? How are those issues chosen?
It was a bit challenging because, you know, Parisian wants to talk about everything and I have an idea about everything. So first we had to define as the city of Paris what were the areas of competence, because the city of Paris, such as any level of government, has specific areas of competence. So for example, we cannot talk about health because we don't have the real competence about health. We cannot talk about several subjects. So the idea was first for them to understand what were the area of the competence of the city of Paris, because once again, we wanted for them to have a real impact on action. And if at the end of the day or at the end of the year, we say, oh, great, these are great ideas, but these are competence of the states and of the government, and we cannot do anything about that. So first we had for them all a kind of a training session explaining what was the area of competence. And then we said, okay, you can pick whatever subject you want. And then my colleague deputy mayors came in front of the assembly saying, in my delegation, in my portfolio activity, this is the topics I'm struggling with or I want to put forward, and I would need some help on that, or some new ideas, or some new way to see things. And based on this speed dating kind of session, they choose and they chose the subject they want to work on. And first of all, it's very large, you know, it's very ambitious, and this is really large. But at the end, the more they work into the citizen assembly, the more they are auditioning people, they are meeting with elected officials, but also experts, association and stuff. The more the subject is narrowing down. For example, they had to. We selected some different topics for the third edition of the Citizen Assembly. The topic of loneliness in Paris, but also the topic of democracy challenges in Paris. And they chose to work on the subject of democracy, of course. But we also say, okay, the subject of loneliness is also interesting, so you can work on a different group panel kind of into the Citizen Assembly, because we have 3 kind of sessions into the Citizen Assembly, 3 workshop. The first one is dedicated to work on the deliberation, so the Parisian law, in order to make a Parisian law. The other is for the citizen vow. And the third one is kind of, how to say that, a space when we can talk about all the Parisian subject, and to be able to ask a question to each Parisian council, to the elected official. So yeah, it's this is the one of the challenge we have, how for them to choose the topic they want to work on, and we try to be as transparent as we can, saying this is what we can do, this is what we cannot do, and in each of the areas of competence of the city of Paris, these are the subjects already done or a bit challenging for us, and then the citizen chooses the subject they want to work on.
So again, to distill something that's very complex and to simplify it beyond what does it justice. I mean, it sounds like there's both a top-down process that you led, but also a bottom-up process in terms of policy selection. There are a lot of questions I want to get, or a lot of issues I want to get to, including how you involved, sort of what was leadership in the mayor's office, but also what was the role of assembly members. But first, maybe it's time to bring in some of the questions that audience members are asking. Peggy, you already responded to one, but I think it's actually related exactly to what we were just talking about. So Francesco Tena, and I'm just going to call him out by name, partly because he was a fellow with us last year, I believe it was 2 years ago, an Obama Foundation scholar who sits with Columbia World Projects. He was involved in doing participatory budgeting in Boston with youth. And he asks the very good question, what topics or issues are citizen assemblies best at bringing momentum to? What topics would you not recommend citizen assemblies for? So I think we started to talk about this and what the limits of city government decision-making can influence, but what else do you have to say to that?
Well, the way I responded was, I think to me, because I know that a lot of cities that are considering citizens assemblies, they're like, oh, well, there's probably things that are going to be too controversial, and I actually think that this is what a citizens assembly does best, as long as the topic's well defined, right? Not so overbroad that you can't come up with, a tangible solution, right? Or that it's just so, it's just too amorphous. And so I think, as long as it's well defined, I think game on, because you're bringing such diversity, to a subject, and removing the barriers for participation that I think any community conversation is worth having with a citizens assembly. But that's my view.
Great. Anouch, anything?
It's a bit difficult to answer because, for example, my first answer would be we don't want them to work on the subject where we don't have an impact as a city. But in the meanwhile, the second cohort of the Citizen Assembly work on how to support homeless individuals, people living in the street, which is some of this, the aspect of this big question is part of the competence of the city, but a huge part is not of the competence of the city. For example, how the state, the French state, has the responsibility to put these homeless people into shelters. This is how you say that, to put them in home. And this is part of the advocacy we are having as a city, saying we have the responsibility to take care of the children, for example. But for all the others, it's your responsibility as a state, and you are not taking this responsibility to the level you should do. And this is part of the plaidoyer of the advocacy of the city of Paris. So it's not totally the competence of the city, for example, but it's also a major subject in Paris, especially when we had the migration crisis in 2015 with all the crisis in Syria and stuff. So I would say not pick the subject where the city of Paris cannot do anything through the deliberation, the Parisian law, but at the meantime, for example, health, we don't have the competence for health. We don't have the competence of the what the students are studying in the schools or in high schools. So this would be the subject I would say, listen, I get that this is really important for you and you want to talk about that, but just you should know that this is what the city can do and this is what the city cannot do about that. But on the subject of the homeless people in the street, they worked on this subject. We had like 50 measures into the deliberation, into the Parisian law, but we also put in annex of this deliberation a whole advocacy speech towards the state. And so this was really complementary to one another. We had what the city can do and what the city cannot do, and what the Parisians of Paris, the citizen of Paris, wants to ask from the government. So yeah, it's a bit difficult because I would say not speak about what we cannot do, but at the meantime, this is also a way for them to take this subject, which are the everyday subject for Parisians, seeing people in the streets, but or putting your kids to school or going to hospitals. But also we have to, to just put a frame around these debates and to be sure that at the end of the day, what they will suggest to and what will be voted to by the Parisian Council can be really impactful on what we do, because at the end it's more like disappointing than anything else,
Thank you. These are phenomenal. This is a phenomenal exchange. I feel so fortunate to be having this with you. Maybe we could talk about political buy-in, because I think that's often, at least in the US context, a real source of anxiety about, it's often someone who isn't sitting in the mayor's office necessarily, or it's certainly often not coming from the mayor herself, who is leading these processes. I know that that's fairly different in Paris with Mayor Hidalgo. But I'm curious about how you get buy-in from elected officials generally, and how did you involve them or not involve them? But also then, to go to another question that someone in the audience asks, how do you also then ensure that there's not political interference once you've started to involve local election officials?
Well, I would say that I was very fortunate because I bought some street cred by passing that 1 cent sales tax. So I had buy-in from my council, said, okay, maybe she knows what she's doing. But when I brought this citizens assembly, I have 7 council members, and this, like I said, has been a long standing issue for our city. And I got the buy-in because it didn't preclude. What I had to tell them was, this doesn't, a lot of electeds will say, and I've talked to, Boston City Council, I've talked to city councils in other places, and the first question I get is, well, I appoint people, and I said, yeah, but that's an echo chamber, right? So you're appointing people, special interests. This gives us the street cred to walk the talk about really engaging our community and hearing from people we don't hear from. And my council was so supportive about that. And they were excited, but kind of, still, this was brand new. So it was, I think letting them know that this doesn't, this isn't augmenting their decision-making, because they ultimately had to make the decision. But they also had to agree that, they had to abide by what the panel, came up with. And what was exciting was the panel wasn't seeing anything different than the rest of our community. But what was exciting was it wasn't a city-driven process. So it built that authenticity and that trust. And plus it also took a lot of pressure off the council. So I tried to sell it. And especially as we were going through it, I realized, wow, this is the best of all worlds for local government.
Okay. Just, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Thanks, Anouch.
Yeah.
Let me turn to you while I try to regather my thinking here for a minute. Sorry, Peggy.
Okay, so first, what was the role of the mayor's office? Is that what was the first question? Major, because as you know, the mayor of Paris has a really strong ambition about democracy, and her commitment to democracy is not to be denied, and she is the driving force behind this initiative for sure. But it's not only about, what is the mayor of Paris thinking and what she wants to do, because behind her there is a real big administration. And I think that one of the lessons we can learn from the Citizen Assembly is, if we don't have a strong political backing, you cannot give to these bodies meaningful powers. And when I think about meaningful powers, it's also what the administration of Paris is doing in order to support this body, but also how we can allocate sufficient budget to that, because it's also a matter of money. For example, for the citizen of the Citizen Assembly, we are compensating their presence into the assembly, and this is also very innovating. So we had also to make a proof that the budget was here and allocated to the Citizen Assembly. So when you know that in France, the allocation from the state to the local authorities, such as Paris, is down, it is also, it needs a lot of courage to allocate some more budget to a new initiative such as the Citizen Assembly. On how there is no bias, of course, like in the first days when the citizens are coming to the Citizen Assembly, they are like, sitting in the chair like that, like, or you're going to brainwash us, and you're going to instrumentalize the Citizen Assembly in order to put all your political subject and to make us say what you want us to say. And at the end of the day, at the end of the cohort, at the end of the session, and after 1 year of working with us, they are truly like amazed by the fact that we gave them that amount of power. So of course there is some elected official coming and talking to the citizens. This is, as I said, one of the first steps in order to present what has been done, what can be done, and what should be done in their eyes. But we are really like prudent about the fact that when they are working together, there is no elected official at that time. So we are talking to them, but when they are working, we're not doing like, oh no, you shouldn't say that, or you shouldn't think about that. We are letting them work as they want. They are, of course, with people from the administration. And we also wanted to have at each time of this audition of expert, of audition of elected official, to also have the opposition coming, in order for them to say what they think and say what they are doing in their proper district, because each district has a specific colors. It's like the states in the United States. So yeah, the idea was to also not to communicate in the beginning of the citizen assembly, because we didn't want them to think that at each step we are saying, look how we are talking to the citizens, and this is a Parisian drawn by lot, so this is really representative of the citizens of Paris. And so we were really careful about that. And we also created like a control committee composed by experts and by thinkers and by searchers, such as people from the FIDE, in order for them to say to us at each time, at each moment of the citizen assembly, look, now you are too much over them, you should give them more space to work and to be able to think without being like looked or in the presence of an elected official. So of course, maybe it's not perfect, but we are trying to find the right path in order for them to be in touch with the elected official, because this also was one of their requests, to be in linked with the Council of Paris and to the elected official of Paris, but also to give them space to think, to choose their subject, and to be able to write their deliberation or their vows totally independently of what the elected official, the mayor of Paris, thinks and wants for the city. I don't know if it's clear.
Very clear. And really, I mean, I'm going to turn, and we should have booked hours for this conversation. There's so much to say. We're getting close to the end. But there are a couple of questions that are asking about whether citizens' assemblies really effectively address political polarization. And my own experience is that when you sit in government, you hear from the loudest voices or from special interests, but you often don't hear from not just the middle, but from the majority, sort of the real majority of what people think, where there's often more common ground than there are differences that separate us. But we wouldn't know that from many of the ways that we invite the public into conversations. How effective are citizens' assemblies at not just finding the middle, but overcoming polarization itself and bridging differences? Either of you can take that off.
I was just going to say, I mean, what I saw firsthand was, I mean, as diverse as our panelists were, and I mean, not only via the demographics and their experience, but very politically, very different. And by the end, you're working together over 90 hours, and the respect and supporting one another, even if they didn't agree with what the other person was saying, they were supporting, they were holding up and keeping space for, their fellow panelists. And it was a beautiful thing, because I was looking at this, I was watching some of their convenings, and I was so blown away, because I thought, if we could do this on the national level, wow. And I just felt hope. And that's why I feel that these are so invaluable, because of the time that they do spend together and all the tools that Healthy Democracy brought to us about learning, teaching and building capacity and building leaders in a group of people who never thought they had a voice in government is powerful.
That's great. Maybe because there's so little time left, and you've both invoked, Anouch, you talked about FIDE and the support they gave you. Peggy, you've just mentioned Healthy Democracy and the support that they offered you. we're talking about this work as if you're going into the complexities, but we talk about it as if this is something one just unveils and it's and sets it up and it's finished. But this is incredibly technically sophisticated work. Can you talk about the ecosystems that you both benefited from just in like a minute each, but also, and maybe this is the final thing to reflect on, what's missing from the ecosystem that you would like to see? What will give this movement greater momentum going forward? Anouch, why don't you start us off?
What we learned from the FIDE, you mean?
What you learned from FIDE on the one hand, and what's missing from, I mean, maybe in Paris, nothing is missing. You've talked about this plentiful set of models that you have, but what's missing, do you think, from the landscape today if we're going to see this become routine across the world?
What we learned for the FIDE a lot, because honestly, without them, we couldn't do and we couldn't design this assembly, because it was really important for us to benefit from the different assemblies created in the world, such in Ireland, in Belgium, this kind of models we had. And we needed to have this insights from abroad and from some experts to be also to have experts by our side in order to be sure that what we were doing would be impactful, and this was really the target. So we had like hours and hours talking with the FIDE expert, and it was really like inspiring, challenging, and it was really helpful for us. And we always said that this is not like the final design of this assembly. This will change maybe each year, and we have to change and to be evolutive, to be able to evolve through this process and to this path. And it was really helpful for us to have that. And I think that maybe what is missing now, I mean, now that we created this assembly, a lot of persons around the world are asking me to testify and to talk about that, like I'm doing today with you. And I think that it would be maybe helpful to create some group or some platform in order for all the elected officials, but also among the administration, because of course there is a political ambition, there is a political goal to create these assemblies, but also behind us there is administration, and there are people working every day on this subject, and they need to be also trained about that, and they need to have some expertise exchange with other countries, with other cities, for example, to understand how to overcome such some of the challenges we might have, or to be able to learn from other experience. So maybe to create a platform with all the city, and not only the elected official, but also the experts, people working in the administration, but also the new students. I'm having a lot of students in my cabinet, in my team, and this is really inspiring to have this use, because they are the future of the citizen innovation and the democratic innovation. And I think we really need to have this kind of platform when we can have these exchanges.
That's a phenomenal idea. I'm taking notes. Peggy, do you want to have a
say,
very succinct end?
Anouch just hit all the high points. The only thing I would add, and I know this is underway, is the toolbox, because local government doesn't have unlimited resources. And so, we were fortunate that we were able to fund this. And I feel still to this day it was the best investment we could have made, because it actually supported our residents. But there's a toolbox about working with, the private sector, working with foundations. And I know, we have Peter and Jenny Haas in our community. So we have the Haas Foundation, and I know they follow this really closely, which is really exciting to me, because the more people understand this tool, and what FIDE and Healthy Democracy and what you're doing, Tom, and Holly is really getting that word out. I'm seeing it starting to pop up everywhere. And now we got to get out of the realm of less esoteric, like this great study, but we have to make it accessible for government, so electeds don't feel challenged, that city administrators don't feel like it's extra work. It's like demystifying that process for government. And that way we can, how do we easily put this together? And it is very complex, but yet once it was underway, we were off to the races. So
thank you both for what I think is really an agenda-setting conversation for most of us. So it gives pointing us in the right direction going forward. I am so grateful. I'm going to hand things off to bring us to a real conclusion with Marjan Isasi, my dear friend and colleague, and she's going to tell us what's coming next. Thank you both so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tom. And I think we should move these conversations to 90 minutes because we can never get them quite in a 60-minute frame. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Anouch. Thank you, Peggy, so much for this conversation. It is always so inspiring to hear from city leaders like yourselves and who are willing to do bold and really ambitious work to bring citizens together, both citizens who I think, especially given the US election of this past month, are really eager to be involved in meaningful and consequential ways, or those who are marginalized and the voices that we don't hear. So thank you so much for that. Peggy, you gave us an additional deliciousness to citizens' assemblies with your reference to citizens' assemblies being the missing piece of the pie. I'll remember that one. And Anouch, thank you so much for stressing the importance of shifting power over time, and citizens are to co-create and co-govern with us. And thank you also for your kind comments about FIDE and the work that we were able to do to help you. I'm the executive director of the Federation for Innovation and Democracy in North America, and we're an organization that very recently launched, and it is an absolute honor and really a pleasure to be working with New America and Columbia World Projects on this series of webinars. If you have enjoyed what you've heard today, please tune in. We are having our next webinar on January 23rd, and I will be moderating a conversation between a couple of people from the OECD. They just released a report on building trust in institutions that you don't want to miss. And the conversation will be with Ellen Landemore of Yale University, and we'll talk about really the promise and the practice of citizens' assemblies, especially as it relates to mutual trust. And how do we do that? How do we make sure that we enhance trust as a result of our practices? So with that, stay in touch with any of us and stay tuned for more details and have a very happy holiday. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you all.